Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a very exciting episode for you. We're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Warren Bradley. Warren has worked in elite sport for about a decade. He has a PhD in performance nutrition and human physiology, and he is the founder of a company called Hytro, which specializes in BFR sportswear. BFR is blood flow restriction, which we've talked about previously on a few different episodes. And this was really insightful for Rob and I in that we've known about BFR for a long time and have been aware of its applications in bodybuilding and hypertrophy and also injury rehab. But I think the thing that's so exciting about it now is that there's a huge amount of research suggesting that it has great performance benefits as well, whether that's strength or endurance. And Warren really knows his shit. He has dug deep into the research, and I think I really respect his scientific rigor. He's able to discern between good and bad science, and is really passionate about the product that he's conceived. So it was really enjoyable to listen to, very informative, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it if you've got any curiosity about BFR whatsoever. But before we get into it, as ever, a big thank you to our show sponsor, Wit Fitness. We are recently announcing the launch of the Sigmundsdottir range, designed by Sarah herself. So please check that out on the website wit-fitness.com and use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. Right, let's get into it. Warren, how are you, mate?
I'm great, guys. How are you? I'm really well.
Not too bad. A little bit sore from yesterday. We had a little bro sesh, didn't we? So, yeah, got a nice sort of upper body soreness. For the listeners who might not know who you are, could you give us a quick introduction to who you are and what you do, please?
Sure. So I spent just over a decade in academia. So I was doing a PhD at LGMU, bit of guest lecturing there too. And simultaneously, I was working in professional sports. So I was quite lucky. Back in 2011, I was afforded the opportunity to go over to Munster Rugby. So for any rugby fans, pretty decent club, we'll say. So I was really lucky to get straight into, a real top flight rugby club while doing my PhD. So they were funding my PhD at that time. Off the back of Munster, I spent 2 seasons there. Fantastic time over in Cork in Ireland. It's a beautiful place, great team. Learned my trade, really, learned my craft there, and then moved on to England Rugby. So I was working underneath Professor Graham Close for the seniors, and then I had an autonomous role with the England Rugby Sevens squad. So that lasted quite a while. That was 5.5 years. It was at Sevens, and also supporting the first team, which was great. I then kind of transitioned into a bit more football. So I then moved to work with Derby County and Hull City, and I did some work in kind of rugby league and rugby union on the side, so Leicester Tigers, Salford Red Devils, etc. So yeah, just kind of an amalgam of research, doing a PhD at university in LGMU, and working in professional sports. It was quite cool though, because I was able to kind of put that researcher hat on while working with professional athletes, but also apply the research practically. Because what you see a lot is researchers go into clubs and they don't necessarily translate it into practical terms for the athletes. They're talking about, carbohydrate metabolism. They don't understand any of this. Some of them may, to be fair. But it was just really fun applying the science in real practice. It was a great 10 years. And then I've moved away from that now to pursue a new career in a business called Hytro that I've created, which I'm supporting today if you're watching. And it's essentially blood flow restriction integrated sportswear. And it's basically just to make the remarkable benefits of blood flow restriction available for everyone to use, because it's been previously only used in professional sports, really, or very, very rarely used in bodybuilding settings. And it's largely due to the tools available. They were just so impractical. But yeah, we created a product to make it accessible for everyone. So that's a brief history of Warren Bradley.
Amazing. Thank you. And we're definitely going to dig deeper into the Hytro stuff a little bit later on. But I've got a couple of questions. I wanted to learn a bit more about what exactly your roles were in the rugby and football clubs. Like, was it in S&C? And could you give us the details of your PhD as well, please?
Sure. Sorry, should have mentioned. So it was in my PhD was in human physiology and nutrition. And then in a professional setting, it was as a nutritionist, so performance nutritionist. And I kind of bounced between full-time work in a club to consultancy work. Now you get the pros and cons here. So full-time work, fantastic because you're really ingrained in that group and it's a real family setting, especially in all sports, but especially in rugby. I really felt that kind of connection, that family unit. So that was really great. But then consultancy, you typically earn quite a bit more money because you're dancing across a few clubs a week, so 2 or 3 clubs. You're on a higher rate. So it's really great financially, but you don't necessarily get that kind of that family ingrainment in the clubs. So you feel slightly on the outside sometimes. I mean, obviously, if you're quite a confident person and you're working, with lads who are similar age to yourself or, just slightly younger, then it's great because you can bounce off one another. It's fine. You can still make them relationships, but you only see them twice a week. So it's a bit more difficult. So yeah, there's kind of consultancy and full-time work in professional sports. And then in terms of my PhD, we did some really quite incredible studies, actually. We did the first ever muscle glycogen depletion in rugby while taking muscle fibers out of professional rugby players while they played, which was crazy. We had about 40 doctors and staff and PhD students doing this study with me. It's my final publication, actually, but we got a lot of professional rugby players to play a rugby game. Prior to that, we'd cut open the legs and taken muscle fibers out of them, stitched them back up, took some out at halftime, took some out post, and basically analysed it for the carbohydrate utilisation. That was after having fed them for a couple of days beforehand to carb load them, and it was a 6 gram per kilo group versus a 3 gram per kilo group to see which would be more beneficial for carb loading, essentially. Interestingly, we did find kind of not much difference between the 2 groups, but we do think just for the sake of ensuring glycogen loading, go for 6, just FYI. And the reason for that, by the way, is because you can't account for the weeks leading up and the glycogen that's kind of residual in the system and how much training they've actually done. You really have to program that properly. But yeah, for safety, go for 6, essentially. But yeah, that was a PhD in the nutshell. Essentially, dive deeper if you want.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I guess help me connect the dots. How did that lead to your interest in BFR?
So the interest in BFR was purely just me geeking out. I saw it being used in every single club I'd ever worked in, be that football, rugby union, rugby league. So I'd seen it used and it looked really unusual. I mean, you guys can attest to this. You see someone, applying a strap or a cuff, the leg's going red, it's getting veiny, they're visibly in discomfort, but the results are absolutely incredible. You see them, progress. The hypertrophy is just rapid. Within 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to see some size or strength gains, without fail in someone who's never done blood flow restriction training before. So I saw that and I was like, there's something in this, scientifically, there's something really incredible going on here. So I took a deep dive into the research. It was kind of to the latter end of my PhD when I had a bit more time to do a bit of external research instead of focusing on kind of my particular area. So once I'd looked at the research and realized how just robust this blood flow restriction training technique was, just for reference, there's over 1,500 papers proving the efficacy of BFR. So it really isn't snake oil. This is one of the most researched things in the market, strangely, even though no one knows about it. So I spoke to the physios and S&C coaches at numerous different clubs, just look, why are you not using this with healthy athletes? I can see why you're using it for rehab because it regenerates bone, regenerates muscle tissue very quickly. But if you look at the physiological mechanisms at play, you can apply that to a healthy athlete. You can improve their performance. Why are you not using it, essentially? And the response was always the same thing. The tools are just too cumbersome and time-consuming to use. And because of that, it's just it's impractical. They can't use it with squads of athletes. They could maybe get away with using it with 2 at once if they had 2 systems, but you'd still need a coach to, be one-to-one coaching, with these guys. So you're really taking them away from the session. So it's just impractical in a pro sports setting. So once I realized there was an incredible tool out there that just wasn't being utilized, and I knew what the pitfall was of this product, it was just inaccessible. It was quite a quick turnaround to come up with the concept of integrating that tech within sportswear to make it easy, to make it accessible, and to make sure that people can actually, benefit from this remarkable tool. So that's obviously where the conception of Hydro came from. And that was 4.5 years ago. I came up with the idea and I applied for a patent at the time. But unfortunately, my business acumen at the time wasn't great. I was a scientist through and through, just a pure geek, working in pro sports. So I didn't really know how to monetize or how to go to market or what to do with it, really. So I sat on it for probably 18 months before I started working with a gentleman called Raj at Goalmaster, who you guys, of course, know very well. And yeah, Raj really took the business in grasp and made Hydro with myself. And here we are today, I guess, with a fully fledged product with upper body, lower body shorts, leggings all coming out. So yeah, it's a really exciting time.
Brilliant. And let's just wind it back a little bit. I want to just establish the 101 of BFR for our listeners who might not be so familiar with it. Could you tell us, from sort of first principles,
Sure.
how it was developed in the first place and what the theory behind it is?
Yeah, it was a concept that came out of Japan. And unfortunately, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but around 20 to 25 years ago. And he named the technique Katsu training. That's KAATSU training. And essentially, if I remember correctly, he was sat down one day or kneeling down for a prolonged period of time, and he felt his blood flow cut off in his legs, and he felt numbness and tingling. And he wanted to explore what was happening there at a physiological level. And basically, fast forward a couple of years, and he created a concept whereby you restrict blood flow in the limb to cause an adaptation or cause a physiological response in the body. So he did a bit of research into that. Fast forward some years later, and the research is really starting to escalate. So for the first 10 years, it was quite slow. It was a really niche area. No one was really looking into it. But once people started to see the benefits of this training, they really started to escalate the research. So what BFR does, then we might as well get to the bones of it, is you restrict blood flow coming back to the body from the limb. So if I just demonstrate really quickly, just to show you. So using a strap, a tourniquet, a cuff, any kind of device to restrict blood flow in the limb, you see the veins starting to pop out already. What happens is blood will flow into the limb, so oxygenated blood. Your muscles need oxygen for metabolism, so they use glucose and oxygen to contract muscle fibers. What happens is the oxygen gets utilized in the muscle. It's been used for energy production. So it becomes hypoxic, or it becomes deoxygenated, sorry. What happens then is the restriction in place will stop that blood from returning back to the body up to around 70 to 80%. Now, it depends how tight you do it. Of course, it's a range between 30 and 100 really, but let's just say around 70%. So you're getting this filling of the blood, of the muscle with this deoxygenated blood. So what happens when you fill with deoxygenated blood is you're causing a low oxygen environment. So it's a hypoxic environment. And basically this triggers a whole host of reactions in the muscle. So it basically gets very, very stressed because of the lack of oxygen. So it, in a very short way of explaining it, it stimulates muscle protein synthesis, but it goes through various pathways to get there. So your mammalian target of rapamycin is upregulated, which basically it's a downstream regulation of MPS. So MPS is obviously one of the foundations for muscle building or power, strength, size. It's a stimulant for hypertrophy. So if you can stimulate that, and this is a very, very potent stimulator of MPS, if you can stimulate that, you're going to get a hypertrophic effect essentially. So the other things that are happening in the muscle as well, because of the hypoxia, your slow twitch fibers rapidly fatigue because they work aerobically. They need oxygen to contract. So say we're doing some very light resistance exercise with blood flow restriction training. Your slow twitch fibers, which would normally be the only fibers recruited for that training, rapidly fatigue. So what happens is the body sends a signal and says, right guys, I need the fast twitch fibers to be recruited to help me lift this weight, even though it's only 5 kilo dumbbell curl, because simply the muscle fibers just aren't being recruited anymore because they're fatigued. So what you have is this muscle fiber recruitment happening whereby all of your fibers are recruiting together to help contract the muscle. So what happens here is you're getting a training effect on all of your fibers as opposed to just one type of fiber. So this is why it's a really impressive way to hypertrophy the muscle very quickly, because you're getting a stimulation of all their muscle fibers. You're training all of the motor units simultaneously, as opposed to having to do 12 to 15 reps to hit your endurance, or even more, and 5 to 8 to get your power strength. You don't necessarily have to do that with BFR because you're stimulating all of the muscle fibers. So I hate this word, but it kind of sums it up properly. It's a hack. It's a biohack basically. You're essentially hacking your body to recruit more fibers to lift that weight despite lifting light weights. So the implications here are massive for a very diverse population, because think about old people who can't really lift anything because they've got brittle bones or something, they can now do body weight squats, or stand up, sit down in a care home with blood flow restriction applied and hypertrophy and improve bone mineral density. Take that all the way through to elite athletes. So if we look at training age, you have novice athletes, you have elite athletes, you have people who've never trained before at all. They have a new stimulus that comes into the body, they will adapt quickly. With blood flow restriction training, it's a new stimulus, even for the most advanced lifters if they've never done it, and therefore they will get them newbie type gains with blood flow restriction training. So this is why it's really, really great for professional athletes, because it's something that can be used without loading the joints, but you can break through plateaus very quickly because it's something their muscles are not accustomed to. So they adapt very, very quickly to that BFR stimulus. And there's a really good study in Olympic powerlifters. I think it's in Sweden. I may have got that wrong. And we can put it in the notes afterwards on the podcast. But a load of powerlifters, Olympic standard, they'd added blood flow restriction training for just 3 weeks into their training, and they actually significantly improved their lifts. Now, these are people who 0.5% improvement in a lift is massive. It's 2 or 3 kilos in a deadlift or something. These guys are way beyond that. And it was only with 2 or 3 weeks of blood flow restriction added to their training, because the muscles were not conditioned to BFR. It's a new stimulus and they adapted quickly.
I heard something similar within the endurance world with cyclists, that they improve their VO2 max by like 5 to 6%, and this is elite cyclists, which you do not get improvements like that. So it shows, obviously, it translates to more than just a strength world. It does go into other areas of fitness. Just on that, I had a bit of a question. So you've mentioned a couple of times about how, people like the newbie gains and stuff like that. How long does this last? Because do you still get those gains if you do this for months on end and stuff like that, or is this something that you should cycle in and out your training for periods of time? Because a couple of times you mentioned there, it's like when someone's had first exposure to it, say 3 weeks, bang, they get these massive gains and stuff. And for me, over the years, I've only ever really played with it, never really took it seriously, just because it's a great pump and it feels really good. But yeah, so the question is there, as I said, do you need to cycle this, or can you do this consistently, and do you still look to kind of get the similar sort of adaptations and growth that you get in, say, the early 3 newbie game weeks?
I mean, as with any stress adaptation, it will taper off. It's impossible not to. It won't just continue to exponentially grow. But I would strongly suggest there's very few people on this planet who do everything perfectly. And I would suggest that this always has a place, because it will always augment what you're doing. And look, if you do everything 100% spot on every single day, there will become a plateau for you in general in anything you do. But no one does that. Do you drink enough water? Not you personally, but does one drink enough water each day? Do you have enough fruits and vegetables, different colors? Do you have enough protein? Do you intersperse it properly? Do you carb load for training properly? Do you do all these things? If yes, then it will taper off relatively quickly, I guess, because the newbie gains will go. But for the majority of people, this is something that can be added daily, in fact, and you will always make progress. And I guess we'll go into it either now or shortly, but there's so many different ways to use blood flow restriction training as well that you can get benefits from. So if we're talking about the recovery benefits, they're lifelong. You can use it anytime you want to accelerate your recovery, whether that's from strenuous exercise or whether that's from chronic pain. This is used as a pain reliever for some people. There's a lot of research now using BFR just to offset pain for people who are 24 hours a day in chronic pain. So there's numerous uses for blood flow restriction training. You've just got to pick what suits you and what you're actually trying to achieve. So not everyone's trying to get big, right? Some people are trying to get faster. Some people are trying to get more endurance. Some people are trying to recover better. So, pick your lane and go for that.
Yeah, let's do that then. Yeah. So I guess classically, my understanding until probably I started talking to you guys a couple of years ago was that it was primarily used for hypertrophy and in injured athletes where they couldn't actually load the body. So let's go through each of the other applications in turn and maybe talk through how we get those effects. So you've just mentioned recovery. How would BFR be used for recovery? And how's that distinct from how you'd use it for hypertrophy, for example?
Sure. So for recovery, what we're doing is it's completely independent of exercise. So we're doing something called passive BFR. We call it recovery BFR, so it's easier to digest, but it's in the literature, it's called passive BFR, which just basically means no exercise. So what we want to do is we want to strap in to a slightly tighter setting than what you would when you're training, when you're doing low load resistance exercise. So it's anywhere from 70 to 90% occlusive stimulus. And with the garments like this, it's subjective. So 90% will be 100 is pulling it as hard as you can, slight back off, that's about 90. What happens in the muscle here is similar. You're going to get that cell swelling. You're going to get oxygenated blood going in. You're going to become deoxygenated, get the hypoxic effect, and you're going to get the cell swelling at the same time. Now, you're not recruiting motor units because you're not doing any exercise, so this is very much hormonal response. But it's something you can do while drinking your protein shake, having a chat, having a drink of water at the end of the session. It's really, really easy to do. So finish your session, strap in for 5 minutes, and you can do 2 to 3 rounds of that. You're going to get that cell swelling. You're going to get the hormonal upregulation. It's going to increase MPS. It's going to increase growth hormone secretion from the brain. And then when you remove that strap, what happens is it floods the entire system. So you get a systemic effect. So this is pretty cool. So if you've trained legs yesterday, let's say, and then you've got your muscle fiber damage, of course, which takes a few days to obviously repair. You then use blood flow restriction the day after in your upper body. So you think that shouldn't do anything for my legs. But because you've created this massive upsurge, this upregulation in hormones, they're going to flood the entire system. All of your structures, even in your knees, for example, your tendons, your ligaments, they're all getting bathed in these hormones that you've upregulated from the passive BFR. So you get a whole systemic body-wide recovery effect. Now, I will caveat that with the fact that the lower body garment will create a more powerful hormonal upregulation because it's a larger muscle, of course. So a larger muscle, partially occluded, is going to create more upsurge in muscle-building hormones and recovery hormones. But if you only have the upper body garment, it's still very, very significant. It's still going to get a massive upsurge in hormones. The other thing that happens, so point number 2 for recovery, is reperfusion. So that just basically means the blood flowing back to the body. So you'll find that there's a massive pressure differentiation between your limb and the non-occluded part of your body because it's obviously swelling with blood. It's like a balloon blown up. When you let go, shoots back. So what happens here is it removes and dislodges waste materials from your joints. So this is particularly important for example, rugby athletes that we use it with at the moment. We're using Hydro for recovery post-game, post-match play, because they take a lot of shots and they give a lot of shots with the shoulders and they're pretty battered, pretty beaten up. So if you think about the amount of kind of micro trauma, the bone chips, the cartilage chips that will be evident in their joints. They may not necessarily be swelling, but they will be evident. There's no two ways about it. You have tiny micro traumas to your structures. What this will do is it will remove them and it will be taken up by the body and excreted really quickly. Normally that takes anywhere up to 72 hours to happen. This does it immediately. It removes them and excretes them. So you really have a very potent way to accelerate recovery because you're removing the inflammatory markers at the same time as bathing the body in these recovery hormones. So you have this double whammy, and it's so easy to do. You just need to strap in and sit back for 5 minutes times 2 or 3 and get on with your day. Now I won't lie to you, it does feel a bit uncomfortable. You guys can attest to this, but like anything we do in the gym, if it's uncomfortable, it's probably working, right? You get that burn at the last couple of reps of a set. That's when the magic's happening. That's when you're causing the tears. That's when you're causing the upregulation in MPS. If it's not hurting, if it's not difficult, you're not doing much, are you? Let's be fair. So same kind of thing with blood flow restriction training. Expect it to be uncomfortable, but the gains are massive from it.
Just on that, so you mentioned you want to tighten it anywhere between, say, like 70 and 100%. And now, is that across the board, say, for everyone, or is there a certain percentage that maybe is best for an individual? Say, for instance, yesterday was a prime example. So we also had our massive bro session, all wearing the tops. Now, my left side, I always need to tighten a little bit more to kind of get the similar sort of feeling than I do to my right. Now, that's obviously just me in particular on each side of my body. Does that mean Ash also needs to say, is his 70% say the same as mine on, say, the straps? Like, because obviously they're numbered, which is really convenient. Yeah. So you can be nice and consistent and you can increase and decrease. But obviously 100% on a large top compared to 100% on a medium top, is there differences, and how do you find your best measuring place?
Yeah, it's a good question. So 100% is just subjective. So you'd get to the same 100% with a large or a small because it's just whatever is your perception of 100% essentially. But the point here really is it's so subjective for anything we do. Hydration, how much water do you need personally? You've probably trialed it over the years. It probably changes. There's diurnal variation, there's weekly variation, there's monthly variation. What's your fitness levels? What's your glycogen status right now? Changes all the time. What is your tolerance level? That is a big one for BFR. And it changes every day. So I can do the same setting and it's way harder than a few days ago because I'm probably fatigued. I've probably trained a lot that week and it feels different.
And your arms are bigger as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I've
Constantly
gone up to
growing,
a medium now from a small. Exactly. Yeah, so it's very, very subjective. But what is important with blood flow restriction training is to get sufficient stimulus into the muscle to create that uplift in hormonal regulation, right? So just because this is something that comes up a lot in pro sport when I speak to physios, because they use very, very specific pressures, and there's a lot of research on that for athletes. Now, there's benefit to that if you're rehabbing an athlete who's a very high value athlete, because you need to throw the kitchen sink at it. We need to look at the literature and say, what precisely does he need so that we can progress him from week 1 to week 8 to get there? And what's that progress look like, right? That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of money and a lot of time, resource from the coaches. But what is actually the most important point here is that we're getting blood flow restriction into him, right? So the fact that you have to do all of these elements and tick all of these boxes is just completely impractical for anyone other than a rehabbing athlete. So what's important is actually just making sure you're strapping in and making sure it's strapped in enough, but that it's safe. Now, to be safe, we have to be sub-occlusive, and that basically means we need to avoid arterial occlusion. So what we want to do is restrict the venous return flow, not the arterial flow. So what we've done with Hydro is we've actually done a research study recently with Pure Sports Medicine and Queen Mary's University London to check the safety and efficacy of practical BFR built in sportswear. And we've proved 0 adverse effects over a 5-week training period. We've proved using a pulse oximeter. Have you seen them? Yes, the oxygen stats and pulses. So what we did is we applied the strap before the set, for the exercise, applied the pulse ox to see if there was a pulse registered. If there's a pulse registered, you have arterial flow. We then did the exercise, so we got the pump. We then put the pulse ox back on. Is there a pulse registered? If yes, we still have arterial flow. Therefore, it's sub-occlusive. We got 2,160 data points for that. Every single time was a hit. And that was using a 70% pressure, subjective pressure. So we know factually, subjectively, even though everyone would have been way different because it's subjective, everyone was safe because everyone was sub-occlusive. So what we know is that in the research is between 30 and 90% limb occlusion pressure is used, and every single one of them has shown a positive benefit. What we don't know is how you respond, or how I respond to each of them pressures, and that would take a lot of study to work out. It's almost pointless. It's just not a time efficient thing to do. So again, I circle back to the point, what's important here? Safety, tick, and is there a sufficient pressure applied to cause a stimulus? Tick.
Yeah.
Simple as that, really.
Because I found when I first started dabbling with this, using like knee wraps and tourniquets and stuff like that, I always found when I used knee wraps, it was better because it was a larger cuff. So with the intensity, I was able to wrap tighter, but get a better response compared to the tourniquet, which was essentially, if it was too tight, your arm would go blue and feel like it's going to fall off. And that was always where, you got a little bit too much and you're like curling the air and struggling. But you're definitely right. And I think it's, as you said, it's like the good thing about that is obviously having the numbers on the arm so you can adjust. So, I'm normally say a number 5 or V, actually today I'm going to go to number 6 because it's feeling. So it's, I was talking to one of the lads from PH Nutrition yesterday, and it would be really interesting getting Moxie test done. Because obviously being I said, because that, as you said, with it, that's like next level, like especially within the endurance stuff, which we're obviously going to go on to a little bit more now. But it'd be really interesting to maybe get you guys to do some of that testing with that as well.
Perfect segue, Rob. So that was my next question was, as the next use case, endurance, because I imagine that is quite distinct from hypertrophy, especially if you're, say, a long distance cyclist. You don't want to put on mass, but you do want to train the ability to go faster for longer. And how would BFR be used in that, and what's the science behind it, please, Warren?
Sure. So the research tells us anywhere between 10 and 25 minutes of continuous steady state cardiovascular work with BFR applied. Now, there's so much research that uses different times, so it doesn't really matter. It's just basically what do you have time in your day to do and what's tolerable for the athlete. I wouldn't go beyond 25 minutes personally, because there's no additional benefits that we've seen. There may come as a study later that tells us there is, but for now, 25 minutes is probably your cap. So what we do with aerobic exercise is we strap in again to around 70% tightness. Typically, this is going to be lower body, because typically that's, aerobic exercise, treadmill, bike, rower type work, or even walking. So what we want to do is very slow cadence. So it's around 40% VO2 max, even down to 30% VO2 max. Now, most people don't know the VO2 max or how that's going to reflect on a treadmill or on a bike.
So like basically like zone 2, that sort of like that sort of low effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Great analogy. Zone 2. But basically, I just say go light and go low. Just a slow cadence, a steady spin for your legs. Something that would normally be very easy to do for 25 minutes. You'd just be watching something on your phone. So strap in with that. And after 2 minutes, your legs will be so pumped, you'll almost hit a wall. You're like, wow, what is happening here? This is really easy, but all of a sudden, because there's so much pressure buildup in the legs, it gets difficult. So what's happening here again is that hypoxic environment is created, and the body is an incredible tool. The stress adaptation response is just unbelievable. And what it does for this type of training is it causes capillarization. So the blood vessels that distribute oxygen and glucose into the muscle for energy production, they're obviously struggling right now because they're recluded. There's not much coming in, and there's a lot stuck in there, and it's just causing all these stresses to happen. So what the body does is it increases the surface area of capillaries in the muscle. So what that does, of course, is it's a better energy distribution system for the body. So if you're more energy efficient, you can obviously go for longer and go harder. That's one element. The other element is mitochondrial biogenesis, which basically means we're adding mitochondria to the muscle. And they're the powerhouses of the muscle. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but they create ATP, which is the energy source, and they use glucose and oxygen to do that. So we now have a better delivery system of glucose and oxygen to the mitochondria. We now have more mitochondria. So we basically have a more efficient working muscle. And that is simply through adding BFR to very slow cadence, cycling or rowing or walking. The cool one actually is walking, because anyone can do that. You can just go outside and do it. So we've actually started to use it with professional athletes now, the day before a game, as both a recovery and a hypertrophic stimulus before the game. Strangely, you would never do that before. You'd never train them. But doing a walk and flushing the system as well at the end is a really beneficial thing to do, because you're getting the recovery hormones and you're actually getting this capillarization and mitochondrial biogenesis simultaneously. So it's weird. You're getting a training effect the day before a game, which would never happen before. But now you can do that, because we know it won't impact the game the next day. It's only going to benefit. So yeah, endurance is a really cool one. It's something that's not been looked into massively yet, and we're going to look into it more with Hydro. And I want to caveat all of this actually with the fact that the reason BFR has not been explored in these unique ways very much is because of the tools. Because it's so difficult to do. You can't get 15 people, which is a very small study size, very small. You can't get 20, 30 people to all do blood flow restriction together, because you need thousands of pounds worth of equipment, tens of thousands of pounds worth of equipment to do it. You need researchers to supervise them, putting it on in the correct position, pumping it up to the right pressure. Now we have a tool with Hydro that we've created so that you can do this research. Obviously, research takes a while, so we're right at the forefront of it and we're pioneering it, but it will be coming out in the following years. So yeah, it's a really exciting time for BFR research in general, but also for Hydro, because we are spearheading it as well.
Amazing. Sorry, Ash. Sorry. Can I just ask? So you mentioned about placement, and because I think this is quite important, and it's something which I've also got a question about. So obviously, when the placement above the bicep basically as high up as you can, I take it where it's kind of placed obviously in the t-shirt, real convenient. When it comes to the lower limb training, back when I didn't know too much, and I was say doing it for my calves and stuff like that, so I was doing BFR for my calves, I'd strap basically just at the top of the calf, but then realized when I'd strap it up at the quads, it would be easier, but I'd get it just feel better. Is that right? Is there a theory behind that? And would you be able to dive into just a little bit on that while we're here?
Yeah, 100%. So never strap the calf, never strap the forearm. Simple as that.
That's a vibe to tell another day, so that's good.
Yeah. If you think about what's at the front of the calf, there's a shin. You can't get an even distribution of pressure. It just doesn't work the same. It's not necessarily dangerous. It's just not very efficient, and it's pointless because you want to be occluded in the top of the limb, either the leg or the arm, and that is it. That's the only place you add blood flow restriction training. But as you said, you did carbs with it on the top of the limb, and it felt fine. It felt perfect, in fact, because it will still stop the blood flow in the calf. It will put blood in, and the return flow will be restricted. There's absolutely no need to do the calf. Now, I've seen companies selling specific equipment to occlude the calf. They're obviously not scientifically driven, because if you look to the research, we know not to strap the calf or the forearm, but people still do it. Now, there is a reason to do things like flossing, so there's the pressure on the elbows. That's a different mechanism altogether. That's kind of pain relief and applying inward pressure, but it's not the same as restricting blood flow. It's a completely different mechanism. It's not something that's in my area either, so I can't delve into flossing, but it does work for a different purpose. But blood flow restriction, only top of the limb, Yeah. Am I working on this? Because my thing is really lagging. Is it okay?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good.
Perfect, mate.
I just wanted to... Oh, you go on, Ron. You got more to say there?
I was going to say, in terms of the placement, just the reason it has to be above the muscle and not over the muscle is because you can cause ischemic nerve damage if you do blood flow restriction over the belly of the muscle. So again, you do see companies with PR with people restricted over the bicep. Now, if you have something really applying a lot of circumferential pressure over your bicep, and then you try to do a bicep curl, your muscles are going to be, pushed inwards in the middle of it. It's very, very dangerous. So it has to be in the right location. And that's why, again, the t-shirts and the shorts that we've created, it's a really important feature for safety. And it's one of the reasons physios love the product, because they don't need to supervise players anymore or athletes, because they know it's in the right position. They know that they can't occlude the artery, therefore completely safe. You can take it home. You can rehabilitate at home if you want. You can train at home if you want. And something I didn't touch on before, it's a very quick point though, a really important point for athletes, is the central nervous system fatigue element. So it doesn't cause CNS fatigue. That's a real big point for people who train a lot, because you obviously program your lifts taper into a competition or to make sure you don't overload yourself throughout the week to cause that CNS fatigue. You can use blood flow restriction whenever you want to cause a hypertrophic stimulus without actually impacting your CNS, which therefore means as CrossFitters who train twice a day, they might get absolutely battered by the end of that week or the end of that macro cycle, and they might need to back off on the training. But they can put blood flow restriction training in, it's not a problem. It'll actually help them recover. So it gives you that ability to increase the hypertrophic stimulus frequency throughout the week without actually impacting loading or impacting joints or impacting your CNS fatigue. And that's why in pro sports it's really useful, because you can use it in the lead up to a game with an athlete, say, who is lacking in strength, power or endurance. You can train them and not be worried about their central nervous system fatigue. They can still play at the weekend, but you're getting another stimulus.
Does that depend on the way that the BFR is applied? Because I would have thought that if you're doing something to failure and getting maximum motor unit recruitment, there still is a mental, like a CNS component for working to failure, because you're really having to recruit hard, versus obviously the recovery and maybe endurance applications when you're not going to absolute failure. The CNS isn't so taxed. Is there some nuance around that?
Yeah. So the CNS is very, very limited. So when I say none, that was a bit of a facetious comment. It's very, very small, though. It doesn't impact it enough to impact training the next day. But what does impact it is if you're fresh into BFR, you will get muscle soreness, because it's such a new stimulus for the muscle. You will feel sore for a couple of days. I'm not sure how you two feel today after yesterday, but I assume some soreness. You feel good. Yeah. But this is why you need to transition into BFR training. You don't start full hog. You might think, I'm lifting light weights. Easy, not a problem. I won't be sore tomorrow. You'll feel like you've been hit by a train. Even Olympic standard athletes, it's that physiologically stressing to the body. However, once you get over that after 2 or 3 weeks of consistent training, you barely get any muscle soreness. And that's the point at which you can integrate it whenever you want. So there is a caveat to all of this. It's that you need to transition into BFR training. You can't expect that it's just going to, be plain sailing from the beginning. You won't get any soreness, you won't get any fatigue, because you need to become accustomed to it. But once you're accustomed to this way of training, your body adapts to it, and your body will be fresh again to go training the next day.
I'll tell you what, actually, it's funny. So you've just said that. So I tried the Hydro Top for the first time on Monday, and I did on Tuesday. I said, fuck my biceps. So my top, I had a large top, and it's great because probably could wear an extra large, but the large top is just ever so slightly hugging on the bicep. So I've got like this ever so slight occlusion throughout the whole session, which was great. So then obviously I strapped in towards the end, did a proper BFR set. And so I had some like strength bicep stuff beforehand. Then I strapped in, did a bit lighter and stuff. And the next day I did have really good bicep DOMs. I was like, fuck, that's sore. And then it's funny because then today I didn't. So obviously, you say 2 to 3 weeks, but again, I have had exposure to this before. So it's like, it's not a completely like new stimulus, but it was funny how, because it's been a while, and then actually using the top, I did have some legit good bicep DOMs the next day. So, and
that's a great case study.
Yeah,
that proves the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
You do become accustomed to. I say 2 to 3 weeks just to give myself a bit of bit of grace there, but it could be it could be days. As soon as you're accustomed to it.
Yeah, as you said it, I then remembered the DOMs that I did actually then have on the Tuesday, and I was shocked that I had those DOMs. I was like, and I didn't put the two together at the time, and then obviously now as you're saying it, I was like, actually, because I just thought, I must have done some really good like strength curls. I was like, maybe I lifted a bit heavier than normal, but no, okay, there you go. That's what it was. So
it's just like going for a 10K tomorrow if you've not done one in a year. Like you're gonna feel beaten up the day after. But I'll do a few of them and you feel great afterwards. You don't feel any issues afterwards. It's the same thing. So once you're accustomed to BFR, it's an incredible tool because it'll just help you whenever you want. It's in your tool bag to pick up and use whenever you want, essentially.
Amazing. So one thing we chatted about briefly yesterday was, I think, well, if we interpret the stuff you said already today, the way I see it is BFR is a great tool for almost shortcutting getting to fatigue, because as we said earlier, the reps that count are the ones that hurt. I think it's Muhammad Ali famously said, someone asked him how many sit-ups or push-ups he could do. He's like, I don't count them until they start hurting. And that is a major principle of all training, is that until you get out of your comfort zone, you're not giving your body a business case to adapt. And with BFR, we're essentially shortcutting that process and getting out of the comfort zone very, very quickly. And I think one of the application that excites me is in performance, you can mimic the effects of fatigue without having to spend all the time and place all the stress on the body to get to the point of fatigue. Can you talk to us about some of the applications for elite athletes that you're playing with at the moment? Yeah,
sure. It's something that's never actually been done before. I've not seen any research in this, and it was actually an idea from one of our expert panel at Hydro. So we have a panel of people involved who are working in pro sports, kind of physios, doctors, nutritionists, S&C coaches, which is really fantastic to lean on. But one guy one day came up with an idea, which was with a boxer he's working with. He said, well, why don't we get him shadow boxing with blood flow restriction applied? And obviously we're simulating fatigue, and it happens within a minute or so. He calls them that hypoxia. And then, of course, he's going to be actually feeling like he's fatigued. He is fatigued, obviously, but boxing under them conditions. So it's mimicking 10 rounds of boxing, how you feel after 10 rounds without having necessarily had to do that work. It's the same in any strength conditioning programming and rugby and football. They take you to fatigue and then do some kind of exercise with you so that you're in that red zone or danger zone, they call it in different sports. You need to become comfortable to work in that zone. And it takes a while to get there. It takes a long time. So that's a big issue. It's not an issue, but it's something that's very difficult to manage in professional sports. But with blood flow restriction, we can get them there in a minute. So it's something that can be really easily ingrained in anyone's training. So as one example was the shadow boxing, but others will be passing drills in rugby. Strap them in, pre-fatigue them, and then start doing passing. It'll emulate them after 60 or 70 minutes of playing a rugby match. They're just knackered, and now they're passing. Football, striking, goalkeepers striking, golfers swinging, anything. I mean, golfers don't get overly fatigued, probably a bad example. But any sport where they're doing movement.
16th hole.
Muscle bulk, mate.
Good stuff, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that actually segues, if I may, briefly into the pain reduction, because in rugby players, for example, they can't overhead press or bench press. So what we do is we'll use passive BFR prior to the session to basically warm up the joints to precondition them. And there's about a 70% pain reduction in the joints, so they can actually start to lift, whereby previously they maybe couldn't. Especially older athletes, 30 plus. Now, they're not old. I'm 31, so I'm not saying anyone's old. But an athlete who's over 30 in rugby has taken a lot of knocks over their lifetime, so they're probably feeling it in the joints. And they can't necessarily lift heavy anymore, or they can't necessarily do the movements properly. But if you use BFR passively before an exercise, and passively, again, is just 5 minutes strapped in without doing exercise, just to bathe the joints, you're going to reduce joint pain and you're going to improve their mobility. So they're actually going to get a better rep range, and they're going to not feel as damaged. And the way to summarize that for people who don't quite understand what I mean is, if you ever do bench press and your working set is 80, right? Take it to 100, do a couple of reps, and then back off to 80. It always feels easier than if you just went straight to 80, because you've primed your tendons and your structures to lift something heavy and then backed off. It's exactly the same thing. You're really stressing the muscles and the tendons and the structures with BFR, but not doing anything, just sat back with it passively. And then when you go into your exercise, it feels way easier than it normally would, and more fluid. And that's how BFR can help you train. And segueing from that as well, if I may, pain reduction in general for chronic pain is this exact same principle. You do passive BFR, 5 minutes, 2 or 3 rounds. But people who are suffering really badly from joint pain, they can actually reduce that for up to 24 hours just by doing a couple of rounds of BFR a day, and that's proven in the literature. So this really does impact a lot of different demographics. Basically, it just depends how you use the product.
Question on that, actually, though. So interesting you said, so I was talking to one of the lads yesterday, and he said he used it and it really helped his elbow when he was doing any overhead work. So it's like in a snatch position, he said it helped him massively. Interesting, when you just said there for like the 24-hour, maybe a bit more, but again, I guess it's still just a tool, because it's not necessarily fixing the problem for the sore elbow in the first place. Because obviously, if someone's got a painful elbow in the overhead position, yes, the BFR will be able to help them, say, train that position. But on the flip side, I'd probably then ask, I know this isn't what you're saying, but I'd then ask maybe what's causing the elbow pain in the first place, fix that, and use the BFR to kind of help with the recovery process to aid in a faster recovery, so then you don't get pain in that overhead position. Right.
It's a great point. Yeah, it's a great point. I like discussing with researchers stuff like this, because it's a nice counter argument, I guess. I need to delve back into the research and see if anyone's looked at that. Fair, but you have a point. You have a point. I mean, it does reduce pain. It reduces inflammation. It's going to give you better mobility, maybe the best mobility in general, and the lighter loads that you're using as well. If you say they did a BFR session, they're using lighter loads, they're not loading the structures.
Yep.
Yeah, look, I'll have to look into that one.
It wasn't. I really weren't trying to catch you out. It's just as you were saying it, and especially because you gave the 24-hour window, it then made me just think as a long-term solution, because the benefits of BFR they're not just short-term benefits; they are long-term benefits. So and because you mentioned about the pain, and it just made me question that. So I'd kind of also then, just while we're talking about different styles, utilizing within something like CrossFit. Now, a lot of the time it is multi-joint exercises, lower limb, upper limb, and I'm just thinking as an exercise like something like wall balls as an example, where you've got a lot of upper body pressing movement in a vocal thing, and you're squatting. If you was looking for the best stimulus for that, obviously you can't occlude both your legs and your arms at the same time.
Can you?
You shouldn't do. You shouldn't do, should you?
You shouldn't really, no, because your blood pressure. Yeah. You could, but I wouldn't. Yeah.
So obviously you're looking for what stimulus are you trying to improve, but because obviously if you're looking to say improve shoulder endurance, then you'd probably look to strap up the upper body. If you're looking to improve lower body endurance, then you probably strap up the lower body. So within CrossFit, do you see there being? Have you looked into this more and seeing how we can utilize it to really get some real benefits from that, especially as you said, because of the loading and training maybe multiple times a day or so forth, and so beyond the recovery stuff and maybe more into the performance side, because you mentioned there about the boxers. Have you looked into maybe CrossFit and how that can be utilized there?
Yeah, it's something we've only really just started to explore at the moment, and obviously working with the likes of, Gus from WIT, which is fantastic. We're trialing different circuits, different kind of CrossFit circuits, and seeing what will actually fit. So the great thing about BFR is it can be applied to any training as long as you lower the weight, as long as you use a light weight, 20 to 30% 1RM. So it can be applied. We just need to work out how best to apply it logistically and practically within a session. As you say, wall balls, would you do your legs or your upper body?
Yeah.
It depends what you're trying to get from it, really. I guess it depends on your goal. Are you trying to get endurance? If so, let's do the legs and let's do a lot of wall balls with a very light weight, or let's just do air squats, for example. Depends what your goal is to get from that session, I guess. But yeah, it's something we're trying to explore at the moment and trying to make it easy to integrate into a CrossFit workout. But right now, we're writing these circuits. We'll be coming out with them on the website. But at the moment, I don't have any concrete answer because CrossFit is just so diverse. You do so many different movements, so it's hard to say. But one thing that you can always definitely do is your recovery straight after a CrossFit session. You can strap in and enjoy the bathing in the recovery hormones and the reperfusion. That's always going to be perfect to do. You could always just do a finisher with blood flow restriction at the end. So you do your whole session and literally just finish with 4.5 minutes of air squats with the straps applied on the leg, just to really squeeze out the muscle building hormones and just to make sure you've got the biggest bang for your buck from that session. You've really augmented that muscle protein synthesis pathway. That's another way to use it. So yeah, you can do the traditional ways of using it, but actually ingraining it in the workout, that's something we are working on at the moment.
Nice.
That's something I was thinking when you're talking about the skills under fatigue part, because it's such a massive part of the sport of CrossFit, is being able to execute your high skill movements when you are fatigued. And with my more elite athletes, it's always a part of their training going into competition. Can they still pull out their high skill movements or their heavy lifts when they're tired? And that was immediately where my brain went of just, there's a big session where they would do increasing intervals of cardio to accumulate fatigue before then doing some heavy lifts. And I think the question I have around BFR is sort of local versus systemic fatigue, because obviously if you're cuffing a limb, the majority of the fatigue is experienced in that limb. Whereas in CrossFit, because the sport is so full body, is there a way where you can spread the fatigue out a little bit more before they then perform the skill? And that's why I asked the question around occluding all limbs, because if you can have maybe a slightly looser occlusion but on all four limbs, then at least the fatigue is experienced all over the body versus having just tired arms when you're about to do a heavy snatch when the legs are involved as well. Have you got any thoughts or opinions? I know it's very early days in the research. But I'd love to hear what your approach might be there.
It's really interesting, let's put it that way. And I think the last comment is pertinent because right now we're at the cusp of doing all of this new research. We don't know the answers to a lot of things in BFR because we've never been able to test it before. And that's obviously why our garments come in very handy, because we can test these things. We can guess, we can guesstimate, we can extrapolate from existing research, we can look at physiology and extrapolate from that. But the honest answer is, I don't know. I honestly don't know. Could we strap into a 40% on all four limbs, and would it be safe for your blood pressure? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it is, and maybe that's a great way to do exactly what you're saying with that challenge for CrossFitters.
Gus would be a good
but then again, we've also got to... Sorry?
I say Gus would be a good guinea pig for that, so maybe throw it to him to give a go.
Yeah, let's get him quadra strapped up. That'd be class, wouldn't it? Yeah, but I guess for as much as blood flow restriction training is kind of a magic bullet for so many things, it doesn't fix everything. So maybe if we find out that just the whole body fatigue is not something that we can actually achieve with blood flow restriction training, perhaps. Maybe it is. Maybe it cures cancer. I don't know.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
One question that I logged earlier that I wanted to ask about the endurance side of things is, if you are an endurance athlete and you're keen to avoid hypertrophy, like a lot of these cyclists want to cut weight rather than gain weight, how could they nuance their application of BFR to get the main benefits versus and almost avoid hypertrophy? Is there a way to do that, or is that just have the same protocols but eat less? How would you approach that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because you will obviously be stimulating hypertrophy even doing the endurance exercise. But but it's not as potent as when you are actually recruiting that fiber, doing contractions like a bench press or a curl or shoulder press, something like that. It's a longitudinal, isn't it? It's over time. You're just building that pressure up. So the responses are more for the adaptation of capillarization and mitochondrial biogenesis for endurance, but you will get that stimulation of MPS. However, you need stimulation of MPS as an endurance athlete as well. You still need to recover muscle. You still need to be stronger and powerful. The honest answer is I don't know what the actual percentage of increase in MPS will be versus low load resistance exercise. That hasn't been looked at as far as I'm aware. But I know that the main mechanisms at play are capillarization and mitochondrial biogenesis. So, yeah, it's something for us to look into, I guess, in terms of how potent it is for muscle building.
Yeah, I guess if you're not eating enough to be in a surplus, then you're not going to have the raw materials to put on size.
Well, of
anyway,
course, yeah, there's that. Yeah.
Just continue the anorexic cyclo diet.
Yeah, exactly.
Just before we get towards the ends of things, I'm just curious what your personal applications of VFR are. Like, how do you use it in your own training?
How do I use it? Gosh, I'm really busy at the moment, so you can see I'm not in the best physique that I've ever been in, but I use it a lot for recovery. So I actually quite enjoy kicking back after a gym session, just on the sofa, strapping in, enduring and tolerating the kind of discomfort. I actually quite like it. I'm a bit of a masochist. I quite like that throbbing feeling in the arms and legs. So I use it a lot for recovery. I've been using it a lot recently because I've not been able to get to the gym as much as I'd like to. So what I've been doing is just simply putting on the BFR shorts in the morning and doing 5 minutes continuous of split squats, just like 15 repetitions on each, just going back and forward. And it's absolutely brutal. Your legs are just blowing up at the end. I mean, I've got tiny legs, but they still blow up, they still get about 3 inches bigger and they get veiny. So it's great to see. So I use it in the mornings, typically before work, because it's quite difficult for me to get to the gym for a long period of time at the moment. And what I have found is I've maintained weight. My body composition isn't the best, but I've definitely maintained a lot of muscle mass in my lowers, especially. But I've really not been doing a lot of lifting, a lot of lower body lifting. So it's definitely working for that purpose, to offset atrophy and to maintain where I'm at. And strangely, I actually not strangely, but just anecdotally, I went to the gym the other day and I was back on the leg press. And I was lifting what I was lifting, 6 months ago, having not had done it for a long, long time. And it took me a while to progress up to that. And I honestly couldn't believe it. I was like, this really is proof in the pudding. I just wish people could see this and experience it themselves, because it really does do what it says on the tin. So that's my use of it at the moment. I've been using it as a finisher in 1 or 2 sessions a week as well. So your typical bicep curls or tricep skull crushers at the end. But mainly my uses have been in the absence of having gym in my life because of just time pressures. And that's another conversation entirely. I can always make time for the gym. It's mainly because of stresses of business life and just kind of wanted to sit down and watch a movie. But yeah, in the absence of gym, it's been very, very useful.
Exactly. Yeah. You got a business to build, mate. So, priorities. I think what's really interesting is you're saying about that. And obviously with the current circumstances with lockdown that's just been, and there's a lot of people with, say, home equipment, and some people still not coming back to the gym and still kind of kicking around with maybe that 1 dumbbell or 2 dumbbells, something like that. It'd be a really good case for intensifying training. So maybe rather than buying 2 dumbbells, you could buy 1 Hydro shirt or some shorts, and you get improved stimulus there. That's a little plug for you guys there. But it's because at the end of the day, dumbbells, again, they cost a fair amount of money. So it's like you might not actually need to increase that dumbbell. But I've been interested in, and especially for the past few days, I've been thinking about it then, is in maybe doing a bit of an experiment myself with some direct arm training. And I do like to do some direct arm training. And what I think would be really interesting is to maybe give not just myself, but listeners, maybe a bit of an idea of maybe like a couple of protocols or maybe some reps and rest and stuff like that people could throw into their own training. And if they don't necessarily buy the Hydro shirt now and they use their own kit, and then maybe think, do you know what, I'd much prefer a more specific tool for this, and then they can upgrade. So so if I'm thinking about doing 30 days of, say, direct arm training with some occlusions thrown in, what would you maybe suggest? And let's go from there.
Yeah, if you're doing just direct arm training, so you'll just pick one for each muscle. So there's no need to do any more than one bicep exercise. So you wouldn't necessarily have to do hammers, bicep curls, and chins because, as I spoke about earlier, you're recruiting all of the muscle fibers. So you don't necessarily actually have to do different exercises. Once you've done one, you've also fatigued that muscle. So there's no point doing any more. So that's why it's really time efficient as well. So I would suggest you just pick one bicep exercise. You pick one tricep exercise, whatever's easy and accessible for you, and do a protocol of 30, 15, 15, 15. So that is 30 repetitions to prime the muscle. That's to get the blood in, to make it hypoxic in the muscle, to cause fatigue. Then you take 30 seconds rest, and then you do 3 working sets of 15 repetitions. And what you'll find is you'll use a very lightweight, 20 to 30% 1RM. You'll find that it's very easy to begin with. Like, this is really easy. This isn't going to work. All of a sudden, you'll hit a brick wall and it'll be like, wow, I'm lifting nothing, but it's really difficult. And what you'll find is by the last set, you should be getting to complete failure at 15 reps. And it should be something you can curl 100 times normally. So it is an unusual feeling because you can feel that it's light, but you just can't move it. So it's a really weird association between the brain and what's going on in the muscle. So 30, 15, 15, 15. Strapped in for the whole duration of that because it's really important that you keep the blood stuck in the muscle and pumped up. So that's about 4.5 minutes in total. You then unstrap, take 2 minutes rest, and then do your second exercise in the exact same manner. So you can do the whole arms in 10 minutes, basically. And if you're going to do a whole upper body session, again, you only need to do one exercise per body part. So, well, if we got 5 body parts, lats, shoulders, chest, about 5 body parts, take about 25 minutes. I had to count them. Take about 25 minutes, but you'll have done your whole upper body, maximally recruited them fibers, and you'll be pretty knackered. You'll be pretty wounded from the BFR for the whole body, but that's a really good, efficient way to train in a very short period of time. And you don't need much. You can use resistance bands, body weight, or very light dumbbells to do that too.
Nice. And I just had a personal experience. I definitely recommend going lighter than you think. You say 20 to 30%, and like personally, even a 20 kilo barbell is on the limit of being a tiny bit too heavy but I can do it. And it's by the last set of 15, it's like by about 8 reps, I've got to finish these last few, which is kind of exactly where I want, which is why, but I think a 15 kilo barbell or weight is that's for me is just perfect, where you're just in that sweet spot of it's actually probably better to do a tiny bit less than to actually go heavier. Now, you've obviously mentioned there about 30, 15, 15, 15. Is that a set rep range, or can you play around with that? Is there principles behind that, why those reps are chosen?
Sure. So that's just taken from the rehabilitation literature. So that's the most widely used protocol, but it's not necessarily the only protocol at all. The general principle is taking your muscles to failure. And with BFR, it doesn't take long at all. It's roughly about 75 reps is what they've found is typically how long it takes. So the 30, 15, 15, 15 works. But there's another protocol that a lot of people do, which is 20, 20, 20, 20. What I sometimes do is I just take it to failure over 2 sets. It could be 30 reps in each set, and that could be it. But the premise of it is causing that swelling, causing the stress, and taking it to failure. That's all you need to achieve. So whatever suits you, really, whatever works. I do actually quite like the 30, 15, 15, 15 because the 30 is relatively easy, but you really feel pumped after. And then right, I've just got 3 working sets of 15 to go. Let's get them done. But max, one after the other, is quite difficult psychologically, isn't it? Taking yourself to failure and really squeezing it out is quite difficult. An important point as well, make sure whenever you're doing blood flow restriction training, you really make the reps count. There's no point, throwing it up. You need to really engage the muscle fibers, think about what you're doing. You're not lifting to lift heavy. You're not lifting for that purpose. You're lifting to stress the muscle.
Proper bodybuilding.
Think about that thing. Yeah, just
Muscle
a couple
connection.
of seconds up and down.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's really interesting, actually. So because if you then drop the reps, say 20, 10, 10, 10, so obviously it'd be less than 75, but using a heavier load, that would actually probably be counterintuitive to the whole purpose of BFI. Is that right? Or am I...
That's correct, yeah. You're not lifting it you are lifting it to get stronger and more powerful, but that will happen because of the physiological processes happening. But you don't need to lift heavy to get stronger with BFR. You need to take your muscle to fatigue under stress and cause this cascade of reactions. There's a term I use quite a lot when I'm talking about BFR, and it's time under stress instead of time under tension. So in the gym, we were talking about it earlier, it's like them last couple of reps where you feel the burn, you feel the lactate, and that is really the time under stress that's causing your muscles to grow, right? That's the bits that count. Over a whole 1 hour session, let's say, you're probably only there for about 45 seconds in that peak kind of burn, whatever, maybe a minute. With blood flow restriction training, you're there for several minutes at a time. Like you're there for the whole 4.5 minutes, you're there. So if you think about it this way, you have a lot longer period of time under significant stress in the muscle, and therefore your muscle has more time to create the surge in hormones. So this is why it's so impressive and to use in a short space of time. And this is why you get better very quickly, and you can grow, you can increase muscle size, strength, and power quickly, because you're actually putting your muscle under a lot of stress for a long period of time, but it's actually only 4.5 minutes, if that makes sense.
Totally, yeah. And to give ourselves a quick plug, we did a whole episode on RPE versus percentages versus weights prescribed. And I think rep ranges fall into the same bucket in that they are arbitrary. It's all about just achieving that training stimulus. So for BFR, what we want is that time under stress, and what's the way that we can most reliably get there. And I think one of my takeaways is that lighter, higher rep sets, you're kind of shaving off less of your work capacity in smaller increments. So you're much more likely to get closer to your absolute max and failure in terms of time under stress. Then say Rob was doing 30 kilo curls. The difference between 1 and 2 is very different to the difference between curls at 15 kilos. And with BFR, doing the lighter reps, you can actually shave off those small increments and get much closer to the point of fatigue and hang out there, versus maybe just hitting failure a chunk away from what's actually in your capacity. And we keep coming back to it, but that discomfort is what we're seeking. So if you pick a weight that's too heavy and you just fail because it's too heavy, you're not actually getting the stimulus that you're aiming for with BFR.
And I guess if you've gone too light, you can always just do another round, right? Just do more reps. So because if you have gone too light, rather than wasting your time, and it's just funny because it's just, as we're talking about failure, I know with clients and even myself, if you say, right, go to failure, you often have even numbers in your head, or 15, for instance. So whenever I'm with clients and I let them start, and I then go, what's 6 times 12? Actually, is it 32? Or is it minus up? Because you try and get them to do it, because then they actually go to failure. Because otherwise you have this number like 10, 12, 15, and then it's like, oh, that's enough. That's all I can do. And it's just, I think with BFR, it's nice to have those set rep ranges, because you do want to try and get, say, your 3 sets of 15 at the end. Because as I said, like yesterday, getting to rep 8, and I was like, I can't do it anymore, but you can, and you go through it. So it's like it's nice to have the target. So, and we've touched on this briefly today, but I think this is a great tool to have in your training, but remember that this is not the sole training. And I think because we've touched on with how good it is, say, like obviously for strength, it's like if you want to get strong, you need to lift heavy weights. You need to have that, and this is a nice way to maybe intensify the heavy weights and improve maybe on other levels beyond just the lifting of your nervous system adaptation and stuff. So it's to add into the training, not the sole thing of your training. I think that's really important to kind
100%.
of say.
Yeah, it's never in place of a solid foundation of training, unless you are a load compromised person and you literally just cannot lift and you want a heavy stimulus in the muscle. Then of course that's fine. Or elderly, I would say, which is probably not the demographic of listeners here, but for people who just can't lift strength, well, maybe it is, I don't know.
Yeah, we have a few older athletes, shall we say?
Older athletes are perfect. They should be lifting heavy because they're capable. But I'm talking care homes who've lost mobility. People who've actually lost their mobility, BFR training is absolutely perfect. And then we wouldn't even be loading them at all. It'd just be standing up and sitting down, basically. But 99.99% of cases, strength training is the foundation of everything you do. This is just a really, really impressive tool, proven by science, to work to augment your training and recovery.
Beautiful way to end, I think.
Amazing. Yeah. So I guess just to wrap up, we want to be respectful of your time. Where can people learn more about you, more about Hydro, ways to get started with BFR? Give us all your plugs, please.
I guess just a typical website, so www.hytro.com. Big one's Instagram, of course, so that's at @hytro_. And we have the Facebook as well, which is just at Hytro Training, sorry. So yeah, just the typical social media platforms. But yeah, head to the website and have a look. There's some resources for learning. There's a science area if you want to delve even further into some of the literature. And of course, feel free to reach out. Always keen to have a chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Warren. Really enjoyed the chat, and hopefully catch you again soon.
Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, guys. It's great to meet you last night as well and have a bro session. So cheers.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, guys.
Don't know about you, Ash, but I absolutely loved that episode. So interesting to know more about BFR and that it is more than just a pump. And I cannot wait to put some of the things that he brought up there and actually put them into practice. And my 30-day arm challenge, cannot wait to give that a proper go. As always, guys, if you did enjoy that, please do share. Share it with any bro that you know, or just anyone that thinks that you think will benefit their performance overall. And or if anyone's got any niggles or injuries, share it with them. But don't forget, as always, you can leave us a review. If you have forgotten, you can leave a review on Apple iTunes. Apple Podcasts, sorry, not iTunes. Leave us a review there. Let us know what you think of the podcast. We love to see your thoughts. And as always, you can find us on all the usual platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube if you want to watch us. And thanks a lot for your time. And we will see you next week.
Cheers, guys.